All right, welcome, everyone. Another exciting webinar brought to us by Covey. So thank you for joining. This is going over, I like to call it a heavy subject just because it's constantly moving. It's something we have to talk about all the time. Something we should have been talking about for a while. And it's how to build inclusive sourcing and hiring strategies. So we have three amazing leaders who I'm going to introduce. We have Jill Schapiro, who is the Chief People Officer at SmugMug and Flickr. She has been a very passionate people exec who heads up recruiting and people efforts company wide. She actually initiated diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at SmugMug and Flickr, and she has also been pushing initiatives forward that foster a culture of learning, continued growth, professional development, training, and clear career progression, and which includes owning the L&D roadmap for leadership to promote manager excellence. Welcome, Jill. Then we have Dr. Bridget Griggs, who is head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And she has a very interesting career path. She received her bachelor's of arts in history pre-law. I kind of want to dig more. We'll dig more later. But she began her career as a teacher in 2004, which is crazy that you are now here because you have been here since 2018, and within the last few months moved into a position of head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Being a double minority, she understands the power of this field and works daily to ensure that candidates and clients realize how truly important it is to have a diverse workforce. And she's with Hophr HR. And then we have Brandon Wadley, who is the founder at Noble Talent. He's a seasoned talent acquisition professional with 15 years of experience at companies biggies like Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Tesla, Enjoy, and Gong. And then after leading TA teams for startups, he founded Noble Talent, which is a TA strategy and operations consulting business focused on helping early to mid-stage companies achieve their TA goals. Ooh, so we've got a really great group here. So welcome, everybody. Go ahead and unmute yourself so you can say hello. We like to play the unmute button.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is going to be fun. Let's start out. So first of all, just for everyone knows, yes, diversity sourcing is what we hear it's called. I heard it called inclusive sourcing probably about a year ago or so, and I just really enjoyed it a lot more. I think it's exactly what we should be doing, which is the belonging and inclusive part, and it doesn't just start from the top of funnel. So let's get into how do we actually attract more underrepresented candidates to the top of the funnel. Brandon, I will start with you.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to break this down to two parts because there's the attraction piece, but there's also what happens after. So, and I think the after piece is really important. So thinking about the pass-through issue, because a lot of companies are focusing on this ideal candidate profile, but there needs to be some intentionality within how how you're looking at your funnel. So you could do all this work up front for the sourcing piece, but what happens after in the pass-through rate? So starting there, analyzing what's happening and looking at the different gender or ethnicities and seeing where the drop-off happens, because oftentimes it's not an attraction issue. So focusing a lot of time and effort there in the analysis phase, and then the training phase, and really bolstering that piece. So when you do the sourcing, it actually pays off. But there's a lot to be done. I'm sure that's the piece that you really want to get into is what can you do from a sourcing or attraction standpoint. And there's a whole swath of things that you can do. There's the bucket of employer branding. Think about what you're representing the company on your career page, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, things like that, and calling out inclusive language, the number of years of experience, but adding in that or equivalent, in job descriptions is really helpful. Think of representation within the photos that you're selecting, and showcasing any policies that you have, whether that's diversity, equality, inclusion training, gender inclusion training, things like that. And then, when it comes to the actual sourcing piece, there are tools out there that are AI focused. Obviously, Covey Scout, I've used it. I've been completely, like, my mind has been changed in how this works. But Covey Scout has been an incredible tool where you can switch the demographics. If you need to augment your pipeline in any way, you can do that with like the human level nuance, which is incredible. And doing strategies along those lines. But obviously, if you don't have the money or resources to invest in a tool, there are a lot of things, with like Boolean search strings that you can
Mhm.
put in. Partnering with groups like Reboot, Color Stack, Power to Fly. There are many others that really focus on increasing representation within like Black, Latin, Native American, women in tech, things like that. So that's my piece.
I bet you people are ferociously writing, like you just said. I like that you brought up the AI aspect of things because, I mean, I definitely have a slew of my own Boolean searches because LinkedIn is exactly where you think to go first. Now, there's definitely broader, right? But now I feel like you can also put ChatGPT to work, right? Which, hey, give me all the strings for HBCUs. Like, let's get going. So now, Bridget, with you, are you holding your team accountable to certain reach out metrics in order to build top of funnel?
Yes, and most of the time when I'm bringing up a requisition, I make sure to go through it with them and make sure they understand what we're looking for. And then we have check-ins because I really believe in accountability. And so we'll go through how many people have been reached out to, as well as how many people are showing interest, because that's a lot of times where the drop can happen. You might reach out to them, but they're not interested. And so we have to think about, is it our messaging? So then we try to change our messaging to make sure that as we're reaching out to these populations, it's resonating with them and it's really speaking to them. And so I do try to make sure that we're staying accountable with the outreach messages, because if you don't reach out to a lot of people, you can't expect to have a lot of people interested. And so that's something that we do look at on a weekly basis, and it changes and it depends on the role, because if it's a hard to fill role, then you might not have a lot of people who are going to show interest. And so it's really about being creative, which I think we've really done a really good job on being creative in our messaging and our follow ups, making sure that they're really tangible. Like, we don't want to just blindly follow up and say, hey, did you see my last message? But just really adding some more like content about the role and something that we can do to pique their interest, which I have seen has been working quite well.
Do you talk about the different like DEI initiatives that a company has, or do you shy away from that?
I do like to bring it up just because a lot of, I mean, it's a buzzword. Like, everyone wants to know how people are reaching out to them, and including that in the process. So if we have that information, sometimes we don't. And so if we
Mhm.
have that information, I do like to share it, because I think it is important, because if they're planning on changing a role, they need to know everything that they need to know about that company. And so if that company has really strong roots in diversity and they're making strong strides toward that, then I really don't like to shy away from that. I like to highlight it to make sure that they know about it.
Yeah, I love it. So, Jill, how is your company starting to build top of funnel? Like, not just with sourcing wise, but are you looking at posting jobs on certain websites?
Yeah, I think we're always looking for, new and different places, obviously. I think one of the things that I think about is how can everyone in the company get involved in that sense? And so one of the things that we put out there is, hey, where can we go? Right. And I did want to say, I think that people don't put enough emphasis on a job description. I recently did a project where I audited just a bunch of job descriptions and I thought, oh my gosh, I could literally switch the company names and it's like the same.
Mhm.
I think that is a very underinvested place. So we put a lot of work into our job descriptions. I am very, very critical and challenge anything that's concrete, like years of experience. Like, I had a situation with a hiring manager where they said, I want 5. I said, okay, so someone has 4.5, I should reject them. Like, well, no. I have done that to people back and forth till it's 2, 1. I'm like, fine, I won't put anything. I just think that those types of things deter people from applying. And then I also think that you have to use that space to differentiate yourself. So we've really challenged our hiring managers to write something that could not have another company's name pasted on top of it. Like, really talk about the opportunity. And we know there are certain things that I think appeal to different communities, right? So if I'm trying to attract more women, there's a lot of data that supports that flexibility and a forever commitment to remote work will drive not only female, but also women of color specifically. So I think that really investing in those job descriptions. And then, yes, we have it as a company-wide thing. Where can we be posting? Let's find every corner, every unique place. What access do you have? But I think that job description is something people sleep on.
Ooh, okay. So I want to tangent a couple spots, but what about, because statistically speaking, women don't, if it's a job title above what they're currently at, won't apply or won't be interested. So what do you think about then job titles, like seniority?
Oh gosh, it's so hard. It's so hard. We are not as strict with titles. A lot of, like, I don't work for like a huge or corporate entity with a lot of red tape. I actually have quite a bit of freedom. So I have a little bit more there. I think that I've seen companies, and I've kind of borrowed inspiration here. I like when companies put disclaimers like, if you don't have every one of these things, we want you to apply. And even like, specifically if you're from an underrepresented community, like, we value that. We value potential. We value providing opportunity and guidance. So I think that I don't tend to get creative on the title as much as like really being explicit about not overpowering the description with requirements and being really critical. And those disclaimers, I think, are a really inclusive addition that can help.
I love, and I'm going to steal, value potential. I think that is massive. And I actually have never seen that on a job description personally. So that I love that, because that just gets me so like fired up. I guess the only thing that still is sitting there, it's like when they see the title, it's like poof, So, but I would recommend in messaging, perhaps it's not the title that you're moving forward with. So I love that. Does anyone have anything to add on that one? Because I know job descriptions are heavy, and I know even just every single job description I have seen too has like, the education on there or equivalent. And it's almost like, is that just on everyone's job description? You have to physically take it off. It's like, what is that? I've never understood that. Are we good there? Because I feel like I could go.
Yeah, no, I personally agree with Jill, because like when I was in the job search, being a woman of color, I definitely looked at it and was like, oh, I'm just not going to get even seen by these people who are posting this role. And so the job description can definitely be a deterrent to those people who could really excel in that role, but they look at the job description, it's so overwhelming. And it's like, I don't have all of these things. So I agree, Jill, like having that disclaimer to say, hey, even though you don't check every single box, like, it's okay, like, still apply, because you still might be exactly who we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I mean, speaking as a, let's say, white cis male, I see this happen with my wife, right? So she's in learning and development with a focus in DE&I, and even in that, with that framing, she'll still look at a job description and she's like, well, I don't have this, or I don't have that piece, like that, and from the recruiting side, that's always just a wish list.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, hiring managers might say, I need all of these things. And then in reality, like Jill was saying, you're testing the parameters of like, okay, what about this profile? They're like, well, okay, that one does look pretty good. So you're like trying to find what's that sweet spot. And then the years of experience are kind of out the window at that point. So just for all the audience members, just know most job descriptions aren't truly, like, all of those requirements aren't required. That's just a guiding light to narrow it in a bit.
Mm-hmm. I almost think job description should be on, this is what your job will be here. This is what you will do here. And here's like how we can help you learn also.
Can I push it even further? I don't like nice to have sections. I just think that's one more place for someone to disqualify themselves. And as an example, I work for a company that is, fiercely focused on photography. And so we used to put nice to have, passion for photography. And I was interviewing someone once and she said, I just have one question. I said, what is it? And she said, I'm not passionate about photography. Should I just not apply for I was like, oh my gosh, it's nice to have. But I think like, listen, we get in our heads, right? And we have to think about what a candidate might see when they read a job description. If I see a list of 10 nice to haves, all I'm thinking is, oh, okay, well, if someone has that, they're going to get the job. I don't have any of those. Everything can be a deterrent. So you can think you're just putting more into the job description. I would argue put less of those things in the job description and talk more about the opportunity that someone has to come in and do something.
Yeah, whenever I'm asked for a job description, again, like I'm external, so I've like, a few different clients, and I'm always like, let me just see if you're interested in the company. Like, let's just start there, because I hate sending job descriptions. I actually had a client one time, I could tell obviously stole a job description because a different company's name was on it. I was like, oh, ouch. Okay, well, I want to go back to what Jill was talking about, how we're getting the whole team involved, because this is not just the recruiter's job. Naturally, the recruiters are the ones that are probably looking at KPIs and how much outreach has to go to top of funnel to build top of funnel. And then what Brandon was talking about, the pass through rates and making sure candidate experience is strong. But Brandon, how do we get the whole company involved? Like, how does that start?
It really starts at the top. Like talking about the CEO, the executive team, because otherwise it is an uphill battle, right? If it's only within the recruiting team, you're going to see minor changes. If it's talked about frequently, if the executive team is on board with it and talking about it in all hands meetings, they're showing their status, report of how things have been going, then it really gets woven into conversations at every level. So think about like, is it recruiting responsibility? That's where like the TA leader has the most influence, sure, in like the day-to-day operations, the sourcing element, looking at those pass-through rates. But if the executive team doesn't care about it, neither will the team members and those hiring managers. They're going to bypass whatever policies you put in. If they're not enforced, it's not going to happen. So I think having either, if it's the head of TA or the head of people, being able to have a seat at the table and getting that voice heard and having the importance of that, of like, why does diversity matter, right? This is good for business. Having, people from different, walks of life, different, backgrounds that they've come from, like diversity of thought is a huge piece to this, right? So being able to, emphasize on the why, and then getting them to talk about it, even though everyone's on their journey, right? They might be very early on, have no clue and just do the performative things, but even that will make a change, right? It might be minor, but obviously, like the more they hear about it, the more they learn, the more it's going to weave into their conversations at home and obviously in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. So Jill, how are you getting your people involved? Like, and is it primarily you're sitting down with every single hiring manager separately? Or is it like, like what Brandon was saying, like more of like bigger meetings? Like, how does that work for you?
I think, I'm on the exec team at my company, and I will often talk about the idea that diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism work, it's everywhere. It's not just my job. It's not one team's job. It's everywhere. It's everyone's job to contribute to it. And so I think that that's a powerful mindset adjustment. And I agree, Brandon, that, yeah, it has to come from the top, because if you get the sense that, we have all these inclusive hiring strategies, but your executive team doesn't actually have a real investment in the work, that's performative. That's the definition of performative, right? So I think that for me, I talk a lot about how there are so many opportunities. We know, because we're all working through these challenges, that bringing more diversity and representation across like all organizations, levels, it's really hard. So if you literally think it's just your recruiter's job to do that, whoa, poor recruiters. Like, I mean, how do you even like put that responsibility on the recruiting team? So I think there's so many things that we do. We get in, we talk about it at the all hands level. We talk about how, folks can expand and grow their networks in meaningful ways, because I often think our networks aren't as expansive as we think they are. So how do you actually do that? How do you make intentional action to expand your network, to diversify your network? But I also think that one of the things that matters to me is that my employees are employer brand ambassadors for me. So I want them talking about the ways that we're different. I want them talking about the fact that we value DEI and center it in the company. So I think, yeah, it's so many things. It's actually teaching people, hey, this is what you can do to help with sourcing efforts. But it's the idea that no, this isn't just the recruiters team. We literally all have an opportunity to participate. So let's not just put the pressure on the recruiting team. Let's accept it as an all-in moment. And we do have those opportunities.
So do you think that referrals hurt or help you in these efforts?
I love that question. So I think if your company lacks diversity, that there's a very good chance that their networks lack diversity. It's not a guarantee, but often it's the truth, right? So I think that I will never say I don't believe in referrals. I think referrals are wonderful. I think your employees know your brand, know the needs of the business, know what values alignment looks like. But I think you have to be careful. I think you have to be careful about bias. We are very biased when we bring someone into the organization, right? And we have similarity bias. Oh, Jill brought them in. I like Jill, so now I like that candidate. Dangerous, dangerous stuff, right? So I think it's two things. It can still help the business. It will help the business. But I think, again, educate your people on how to diversify their network so they're getting more reach and they're expanding and working to improve that, which, by the way, doesn't just help our company, helps an individual. Expanding your network is a good thing for you. But then also, I think you have to mitigate that bias that inevitably appears when you bring referrals into the pipeline.
Yeah, bias is its own, I feel, separate webinar. we could go down that one, and we'll talk about AI and that one too. But I mean, I actually had I had to stop a certain hiring trend that I had. So on my L&D team, I had my leader come from the military. So she brought in a couple people from the military, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, my entire L&D team is from the military. Like, whoa. And we actually had different things on how are we including them? And it just became this really big thing that I didn't catch early on, unfortunately. But Bridget, I know that your company focuses on building this for other companies, right? So how is this something that you tackle? Because every client is different, every company is different. Naturally, that's what it's all about. So I would imagine this isn't just one thing that you have to do.
No, and I definitely concur with Jill and Brandon because even internally at Hop HR, we're very inclusive and collaborative on pretty much everything. Like everything can be put on the table and put out for discussion, and everyone's value and everyone's opinions matter. And I think that's also something that's important because if you feel like your opinion doesn't matter, then you're not going to voice your opinion. And so it allows them to feel invested in the company and invested in the process. Regarding external clients, we also have those conversations with them as well to see what are the pain points that you're experiencing. Like, is it that you're not getting enough females? Is it that you're not getting enough ethnic backgrounds on your team? Like, what is it exactly? And then tackling it from there, because we can assume that maybe because female in tech is something that we've been focusing on, that that's the issue, but it might not be. It might be they're just trying to find someone from different backgrounds, like regardless of their ethnic background or their gender. And so being able to uncover those things in those discussions, I think makes a huge difference on how we would approach how we can help them. And so that's something that we like to encourage them to be very vocal on what it is that they need help with so that we can fulfill that need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to jump in here, and there are a few things that mentioned that I really, really loved. One of the pieces that I, made the difference for me is when we make changes in leadership. Right, that's where you see the biggest impact in change, and talking about inclusivity and how you change the demographic of a company. If you're only hiring, the referrals, the white males, like you're probably going to get more of the same. If you change that at the top, like the affinity bias, that comes along with that, it can shift things in a different direction. But there's this ripple effect that comes with that. So a lot of people think, oh, let's hire these junior roles and diversify there. because there's not as much experience. But if you really put a concerted effort and hire somebody from a different background into a leadership role, the long-term impact of that will change your dynamic of your entire company.
Which brings me right into the hiring manager, because I'm like, this one, I have lots of things to say on this, but I'll let you guys do this. So like naturally, this strategy does take longer. So, Jill, I'll start with you on this one. Does everybody understand that? Are we okay with that? Like, I mean, obviously we have to be okay with that, but there's some critical times where it's like, go, I need this now. Like things are going to start falling. How do you deal with that?
Oh, I mean, I implemented full structured interviewing at my company 3 years ago. You want to talk about it taking a long time? Like we can't even post a role until the entire interview process has been designed.
Nice.
That was a huge adjustment. I think that for me, yes, we talk about that. It's like, hey, we are doing things that we feel matter. So I think that there's always the why, right? It's not just it's going to take longer. It's like, let me tell you why we're doing these things and the larger impact they have, right? So the way that I set it up for anyone is my way takes longer. But if we're careful and we work together as a team to implement these things, we will do it for a meaningful cause, right? We are doing it to create a more inclusive process. We are doing it to increase, representation in the company. Like there's so many things. I believe that people need to be intrinsically motivated to do this work in order for it to really resonate with them. So I don't mind spending the time with leaders to get them there. Now, let me be clear. If someone's just literally combative about doing this, that's a different problem. They're not values aligned and they're not going to be a fit for our company. But if it's someone who just like hasn't actually been held accountable for this as a leader before, which I hate to say it, the bar's on the ground when it comes to this. We do not hold leaders accountable for this work the way they should be. So if I just encounter someone that just doesn't know, there's an ignorance, they need education, they need to get there, I'll spend the time to get them there. I want my managers to understand why this matters and have a self-drive to do it. And I think if you are willing to invest in your leaders in that way and take the time to educate them there, then something like it's going to take longer is an easier thing to discuss with them because they're like, yeah, I know. And now I get it. And I'm willing to engage in it.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone here have ever seen bonuses given out? Talk about holding your leaders accountable. Does it come through money or how are we holding them accountable? Feel free to jump in, whoever's seen this.
I've never seen it tied in, and it really should be. If companies want to make a change, it's like put it where it matters, and what are they going to care about? It should be in their KPIs. It should be tied to their bonuses, and that's where like Jill was saying, like make it matter to them. Mm-hmm. That will create some change for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely think it should be in their KPIs, their performance management, all of that stuff. I have actually only seen it done twice. I've worked with a lot of companies, so you can see how we're not holding people accountable. I mean, that's absolutely where it goes. So back to metrics and statistics, Bridget. So with the Rooney Rule, which by the way, let me just put myself on blast for a second. As my last name being Rooney, when a client asked me about this, I thought they were being cute. So I now know, just for everyone out there who was with me on this, does not know the Rooney Rule, is that a woman and an underrepresented candidate has to be considered for a role. So that's the Rooney Rule. But Bridget, so are you holding your team accountable for that? Do your clients do that? Like what metrics do you see?
It's funny that you said that, Brianna, because I was actually going to say, wow, did she create a rule? Until I did some research to find out what is this. And so I think we're actually doing it unintentionally. Like we're not like, and I want to make it more intentional, but we do already have like women included in every submission and different ethnic backgrounds. I do feel like sometimes we don't push the envelope enough there as far as the underrepresented. For data science, a lot of what we will see are like Asian or like white male. And so we do have to work harder to like get some like blacks in there and to get more females interested in tech and things of that nature. So I do want to encourage our team to continue to do that intentionally, but I will say overall, when I look at all of the submissions that we do have them sprinkled in there, but I want to push us to like have it at the forefront of our mind, like we're doing it on purpose, like we really are
Hmm.
looking and going after these like very very talented people who usually get overlooked sometimes because of that, because they're female, because they're underrepresented. But like, shouldn't that be the reason why we go after them? Because
Hmm.
they need that exposure and need that chance, just that opportunity to show that they can do it.
Hmm.
I
Right.
feel like it's really hard. I've never implemented something as formal, but I've also talked to candidates that have been very forthcoming about the kind of adverse effect of those rules, right? Which is tokenizing, right?
Mhm.
Like you feel like you're the token female candidate or the token person of color candidate, that there is no way that's not going to feel away, right? So I think you have to be really careful about that, because we talked about things that are performative, right? So, well,
Mhm.
that in itself could be performative, right? Well, I'll get the certain number of candidates in the mix because I know I have to. So I think there's something to be said about, going back to what we were talking about before, which is just really thinking about giving opportunities to people, right? Like opening your eyes to potential. So one thing that I talk about with my hiring managers is get this idea of the ideal candidate out of your head. That is such a, I mean, gosh, what a box that no one will fit in. Like you, and by the way, everyone's perception of ideal is different. So it's not even like matching most of the time, right? There's no ideal candidate for any role. There are lots of different people from different backgrounds that could be really great for your role. And I think if you think about it that way, it's okay to have requirements. It's okay to have things that you're looking for, but being more open-minded in general will and giving more opportunities to candidates to come into that like funnel further is the thing that will naturally make that happen. Like I was just talking with one of my GMs of Flickr, and we have mostly women directors and mostly women of color directors in Flickr now. That was not because we initiated rules or anything. It was a result of long-term work on our interview process and being open-minded to different backgrounds, and we just hired the best people for the role. There were no rules, and that's where we ended up. So I just think that I'm not against those rules, but I think you have to be careful because that can also be harmful to a candidate.
Mhm.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I talk about the focus on competencies over company, or finding somebody without this, like, a lack of weaknesses, right? It's strength and the competencies that are needed to achieve the role. So if you look at, like, what are we going to grade this person on? What are their KPIs? What are the competencies necessary to get success in that?
Mhm.
That's what we should be basing all of our interviewing on. And it's, competencies over company, because that's another piece that I see a lot, is this focus on these brand names. And, think about the bias that goes into that. And, they must be amazing because they work at this company. But what about this individual makes them great for this role here? Right. So there's a lot of pieces in that. And just while we're on the Rooney Rule, I will say there is a lot of merit to the idea of it. I have implemented it. I've seen the good and the bad that comes along with it. So if it is implemented properly and leadership is in full support, it can really make a difference. But I've also heard hiring managers say that they don't want to lower the bar in order to hire
Oof.
diverse candidates, which is gross, right?
Oof.
Uh, yeah. So seeing those types of things, but yeah, like it may take longer to hire for certain roles, like educating them on the systemic issues, that the door has probably been closed for many underrepresented groups, and the pool might in fact be smaller. But that's really, on the hiring manager, we've got to be able to flex on that time to fill in some cases, or perhaps the leveling that they're looking for, the location that they're in, because that's another element. I mean, we briefly talked about that, but if you're only looking in Silicon Valley, the diversity of that pool is probably not that great, as opposed to, like, let's say Atlanta, Georgia, for example. And I've, experienced that, where a company was about to open in Salt Lake City, Utah as their
Oh,
next location. And then they pulled the
yeah.
ripcord, and they're like, just kidding. That's not going to help us, diversify our pool.
Mhm. You're bringing up so many interesting points. And I'm like looking at the time, I'm like, what do we want to dig on? I mean, there's just so much we can go into this. And like for sourcing purposes, I think what I hear the most, and would love to hear if you guys hear the same, is 30%, at least 30% of outreach has to be of an underrepresented group, diverse background. That's what I hear recruiting teams. But the issue I find is that, you know, you can't move what you don't measure, but sometimes how can you measure it correctly? So does anyone here, actually I'll grab Bridget because I feel like you've been doing a lot of this work lately. Do you guys measure, like how do people self-identify? Do you assume? Like there's a lot of yuckies in there too.
Well, yeah, that's true. One thing that I have incorporated because our ATS allowed us to put a diversity survey in. So, like every time we submit someone, they also complete this diversity survey so that we can start to see just what is the representation of our active pipeline. You know, how many are female, how many are male, what are the ethnicities that these individuals are identifying as. And that also helps us to see how we're doing with our outreach and if there are things that we need to change or update or amend. Because as I was thinking about the ideal candidate that you all brought up, that's also something I've been pushing my team on as well. Because just going outside of, you know, they have to be at an Ivy League school, or it has to be a top 10 school, or it has to be a FANG company. And so, but that doesn't make them like the ones that don't attend those schools and don't work with those companies, that doesn't make them any less valuable than the others. So that's something I've definitely been pushing with my team to make sure we don't let that be the hindrance to the population that we reach out to.
Oh, I absolutely love that idea. All ATSs should come with that available. So then, I mean, I know that probably you guys are all surveying individuals. Brandon, what are you seeing there? Are people taking the survey? Are they open to it?
Depending on the ATS, it's usually pretty low though. The self-reporting numbers. So looking at the aggregate data, you will see trends, right? Absolutely, but it's not the full picture. So I've seen tools like Covey is one of them. Gem another, Ashby. There are companies that use AI to infer data. So it may not be perfect. It's just directional, but it gives you a good sense of the whole population that you're reaching out to. You know, like we were talking about the pass-through rates. So you may not have the full picture if you're only like looking at one job. You may not have the self-reported data enough to really make like statistical difference, right? But if you look at the aggregate data, like inferred data, it'll start to fill out that picture. You know, are we, you know, like dropping off this opportunity to candidates at the recruiter stage or after the hiring manager stage? Like, where is the issue? And we can pinpoint it and do some training, education, zoom into it. And I will toss in here, if we're talking about tools, we'll probably get into this, but I'm a huge fan of BrightHire, which is a platform that allows you to record and transcribe your interviews. So it's like the Gong of recruiting, but it unlocks what's really happening on the other end, right? What happens at the recruiter stage, the hiring manager stage, like every step of the way. And you actually see it, and you can fast forward it. You can do little snippets, but you can identify when there's a, you know, like you get sparse feedback in interviews, right? You get like 5%, maybe 10% of what actually happened. And it's all like biased. It's not very objective. It's not evidence-based. So if you can see what really happened, then you can make better decisions at the end of the day.
Again, this is perfect for the bias webinar, so we're gonna have to invite you back for that. But are the candidates okay with that all being recorded?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the other piece is like, as long as it's consistently happening.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And there's an opt-in. If they truly don't want to be recorded, they can opt out, you know, to that piece. But for the most part, people are it's so normalized. Every sales call you jump onto, every webinar you jump onto, it's recorded. And, you know, if anything else, it's going to help their chances of success because there's accountability.
Yeah, no, I love the accountability part. There's no hiding there. And then I feel like even another webinar is hiring manager feedback. How are we collecting all of that and making that a good process? But I actually found a couple years ago there was this list. I should actually dig it up. There was this list that showed the most inclusive companies based off of like the numbers. Because again, what only 5% of companies are reporting their diversity numbers. Well, but these ones were, and you actually got to see, oh wow, like look at that. I mean, I don't know why we're not holding ourselves more accountable to that. And so that's the only time, Brandon, that I will actually go look, at specifically for different companies, because I agree, like, the metas of the world, and like, I mean, I even have someone go like, I like people from LinkedIn, but from 2006. Which, by the way, I use Covey for, so thank you for that. But yeah, they get very specific. But yeah, that's where the biases all come creeping in yet again. So Jill, I want to go back to you because you made an interesting comment about hiring managers, and the ones that are not on board are just not right for the culture, the values, the mission. So how do you deal with that?
I'm still cracking up at that LinkedIn from this year. It's like ordering a Cabernet Sauvignon from like a certain year. That's like hilarious. I'm so glad I'm not an external recruiter right now. That's wow. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I think that one of the things that has been important to us, and it kind of just goes back to what we were saying earlier, are your efforts real and genuine and at the core of who the company is, or are you just saying things because of the external pressures to like make statements on DEI? Are you being performative? So in my mind, what we've done is we've drawn some significant lines in the sand. That means, coming up with policies and being very clear about those policies, holding our leaders accountable, and quite frankly, exiting harmful people out of the organization, because that's important. And if a hiring manager is resistant to inclusive hiring strategies, then yeah, that is a values misalignment. In my mind, that's a reason to part ways with someone, because I have enough, on my plate to just activate all my leaders and get them in the right mindset. I don't have any time for an aggressor to the work. And I think there are companies that have made themselves very known because they've said things like, leave your problems at the door and just come to work. So those managers can go work at those companies. That's ridiculous. We're humans. We can't do these things. So I think it's about like, yeah, being clear about who you are and then taking the action. So if you have a leader that is resistant to this, they're not a fit and you exit them. And that sounds harsh, but trust me, like the environment that remains is a bunch of open-minded, educated, inclusive leaders. That's the culture I build. So we stick to that.
Okay, so then in the interview process, you're asking all of those questions then to make sure
We
they align
screen
with those.
for inclusion specifically. Let me tell you, I just did a podcast with Kim Crowder, who's an amazing DEI expert that I highly recommend. And I told her that as part of our exec screening, I do a specifically DEI focused interview. And let me tell you, I have had people get so aggressive with me in the interview. I've had people say, I've never had anyone ask me questions like this before. And I was like, yeah, isn't that sad? You should be held accountable at the highest standard for DEI. So not only are we doing specific DEI anti-racism focused interviews for executive candidates, but every single position we're screening for inclusion specifically. And in a perfect world, I want to hire advocates and fire starters of this work. But at the very, very least, I'm going to hire people that understand this is a huge part of our culture and buy into it and are willing to learn and grow. That's the bare minimum. I'm not going to hire anyone that is against the work. And so, yeah, we build that into our actual interview.
Love that. It starts from there. So it's like, it's like you're not letting any more in. That's perfect. So Bridget, now I know, I mean, just in general, data, like everyone wants data. Show me the data and I'll do this. Give me a bonus and I'll do this. But what success stories do you have that can really highlight the positive impact of having a diverse hiring strategy? How do you come to the table with that?
Yeah, and I honestly will even start with Hop HR. So I've been with Hop HR for 5 years now, and when I started building out the talent acquisition team, I went to my co-CEOs and discussed let's look outside of the United States, and so we started doing that. And so, like, we have someone in Philippines. We have a lot of them in South America. And because of that diversity, just in that, all of those different backgrounds and opinions and very valid thoughts have
Mhm.
been our success story here at Hop HR, because I think that's what's helped us grow so much is we've been able to have these really deep conversations and really a good back and forth. And to your point, Jill, that culture, it makes the difference, because if they all fit into this collaborative culture and they're not being combative, they're not being just controversial just for the sake of being controversial, but just really want to build out that sense of community. That's been our success story, and that's how we've been able to grow Hop HR as well as being able to help our clients. So that's, for me, Hop HR is our success story.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so I know it's literally at time, so thank you guys so much. We might need a part two of this, but really quickly, I want to just roundtable. And Brandon, I'll start with you. Is what is one just actionable thing someone can do, whether or not it's in sourcing or hiring? Which one strategy? Like this is it.
I'd say the biggest impact is going to be the structured interviews. So, coming out like Jill said, it takes a lot of work, but if you were to standardize your interview process where you have everything mapped out, you have your job description, you have the panelists on the interview, you have the competencies they're screening for and the questions, and you just rinse and repeat that, that will inherently create a benchmark that is more fair and equitable in general. So if you did one thing, that's what I would do. And a lot of people think it's hard to do. Utilize AI, right? There's chatbots that can do this for you. You can give it a prompt and like it'll get you 90% of the way there, I promise. And then just use the human intuition to, flush it out, make sure it fits the job and that company. But that is such an important piece to all this.
Mm-hmm. Jill, hit us with it.
I mean, for sure that I think that, giving training is important, right? I think that interviewing is one of those things where people just get thrown into it or expected to be great at it. I'm not talking about some huge honking giant thing, but just some training, right? Train people about bias, train people about how to write interview questions. And the other thing is, really work with your hiring managers to understand what you're actually looking for and find the places where you can be as open-minded as possible. Because I just think that again, it's a small thing about getting away from the ideal candidate, but it does open like the potential for more people to come into the process. But I do want to say training is under invested in. So training.
100%.
Yeah.
150 million%. Bridget.
I actually like the idea that Jill brought up about the job description. So that's definitely something that I'm taking away, is being able to talk with the hiring managers and seeing what is it that we can amend on these job descriptions so they're not so lengthy, they're not so bulky, and they actually get to the meat of what these candidates will actually do, because they ask, well, what am I going to do? And so like there's so much there, like it's hard. And so I think if we can like really streamline that process, it will help us to diversify the talent.
Love it. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. Jill, Brandon, Bridget, Covey, thank you for hosting. Thank you all for being here. You'll definitely get this recording, and we will see you next month. Thank you guys.
Thank you.